Hello, my name is Paul Priester. I am a professor in rehabilitation counseling and the chair of the School of Interdisciplinary Health Professions in the College of Health and Human Sciences at Northern Illinois University. I'm very happy to be a part of this conference. I really want to thank the people that put it together. It's a very impressive group of presentations, and it's really exciting to be a part of this. I want to say I'm especially excited about not having to spend half of my time doing basic definitions. It's nice to be around an experienced, wise group of people, and I really appreciate that. I do. All right, this paper will explore whether this idea of whether the 12-step model for treating addictive disorders is sort of a culturally relevant model for Muslims, okay? Can it be used with Muslims in a Muslim cultural context? So addictive disorders represent a major public health concern. It's interesting that they cut across national, cultural, and religious boundaries. Alcoholics Anonymous has developed a successful approach to the treatment of alcoholism and other addictive disorders. So this next sentence, I spent over 31 years trying to take all my knowledge and experience of the 12-step model and write a succinct sentence capturing it. So let's see how it goes. The 12-step approach entails participants following a spiritually based behavior modification regime that involves personal surrender to a higher power, self-examination, restitution, and altruistic assistance to others with a similar problem. While the 12-step model was developed in a European American Christian context, that is in Akron, Ohio in 1935, it was by the original designers, by Bill Wilson, it was designed to be used with other groups. He fully intended on it being used with African Americans and Native Americans to help other cultural groups treat alcoholism. It has been successfully used in other cultural contexts. For example, the World Services Office of Alcoholics Anonymous keeps statistics, and approximately 1/3 of the members of the global AA UMA live in Central or South America. So that's a non-European American, but still a Christian context, but it has been shown to be relevant with other cultural groups. One could make the argument that a model cannot divorce itself from the worldview of the creators. So the originators of this model, it inherently reflects the Christian values, beliefs, and practices of the originators. And there's the question of us whether, if it was developed in a Christian context, is it appropriate or inappropriate and possibly culturally antagonistic to Muslims in a Muslim cultural context. There's even the possibility that the 12-step approach could represent an ethnocentric form of European American Christian imperialism. So this paper will explore two things. First, I will briefly discuss some of the cultural barriers that could exist that would stand in the way of Muslims making use of the 12-step model. Then I will present a research study, a mixed methods research study I did in Turkey and the Islamic Republic of Iran, looking how Muslims negotiate these cultural barriers. So let's explore some of these cultural barriers. I want to really thank, a few years ago, we had a group on a Yahoo group, a Muslim mental health group that was very active at the time, a really intellectually stimulating conversation with theologians and psychologists and psychiatrists exploring Muslim mental health issues. And we got on a discussion of whether group therapy is appropriate or not. And then that transitioned into whether 12-step models are appropriate for Muslims. And about half of these barriers I got from them, from that lively discussion, and the other half I thought upon reflecting on this for a long time. So let's explore some of the potential cultural barriers. First, there's this idea of mixed gender composition of the support group meetings. So it could be considered culturally unacceptable to discuss intimate material, personal content in the presence of members of the opposite sex. Also, obviously holding hands, physical contact, holding hands in a ritual closing of the meeting, which is often done. People hold hands and say a prayer. It could obviously be a problem if men and women who are not married are holding hands saying a prayer. Another potential barrier is this idea of a proscription against the public disclosure of sin. Here, the idea in a Muslim worldview is that talking about sins in public is prohibited, lest you encourage another to sin by glorifying the act. So I don't want to encourage other people by talking about what I have done. Now, here's what I really appreciate about Islamic thinking, and in some ways it's so much deeper than other modes of thinking, that it just does not only look at the act, but delves deeper and looks at the motivation. So there's an asterisk with this prescription against public disclosure of sin. If there is a Sharia countenanced reason for doing it, it would then be allowed. So for example, if I am trying to overcome my addiction by talking about my addiction, that's a good motivation. That's a good reason. Okay. Another thing to think about with this is if I'm at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting and it's fellow addicts, I'm not really encouraging them to become addicts. They already are addicts. So if we see that really there's ways around this potential obstacle that we can see. Here's one that I think is the most problematic, okay? It has been the tradition in 12-step meetings in the United States to hold hands, like I said, and close with a prayer, okay? And for a long time, they would close with the Our Father. Now, this is also known as the Lord's Prayer. This is problematic for a number of reasons. If you really look at the content of that prayer, there's elements of shirk in that prayer that are problematic, okay? So, it's important to note, though, that this is a controversial topic within 12-step communities in the United States, and that the 12-step model is in Alcoholics Anonymous. They explicitly say we do not associate with any, we're not affiliated with any religion. Okay, the idea is it's a spiritual program. It helps people come closer to God, but is not affiliated with any religious program. And there's been a move away from the Our Father because it makes it appear that the 12-step programs are endorsing Christianity when they do not. My estimate would be probably half of the Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in the United States now have stopped using the Our Father because feeling that it too closely affiliated them with a specific religion. And instead, when they don't say the Our Father, they say the Serenity Prayer. And if you look at the Serenity Prayer, even though it came out of a Christian context, there's no elements of shirk within the Serenity Prayer that would be problematic. Next, we delve a little bit into the 12 steps. The fifth step is we admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. This is potentially problematic, the other human being part of this, the exact nature of our wrongs. This I think that we'll see that this can falsely be understood as another form of shirk if you think that I'm seeking absolution from a human being, okay, instead of from Allah. Well, that is not the point of the fifth step. If you understand the fifth step, it is not an act of confession or reconciliation, as Roman Catholics would call it. Rather, it is a process of gaining self-knowledge and accepting responsibility for my actions. Now, if we look at, the Islam as a religion wholly embraces and really encourages and glorifies self-examination and self-understanding. We find this in the Quran. We find this in many hadiths. I know that hadiths, you always have to be careful that certain hadiths may have more validity than others. But I don't have time to go into all the different ways that Islam encourages self-exploration and self-understanding. The Khalil Center, that's one of the sponsors of this, has a wonderful short article on their website about self-understanding and how it's a Muslim's duty to pursue self-understanding. So if we really look at the fifth step that way, it's really not a problem, okay? How about the issue of is it appropriate to host a 12-step meeting at a mosque? Okay, this is problematic for a couple of reasons. First of all, the encouraging non-sinners to sin. So if I'm Paul, a cocaine addict, and I'm around fellow cocaine addicts in the meeting, that's not a problem. But what if the meeting's at the mosque and you see me going into the meeting that could potentially encourage the person to engage in the sin? That could be a problem. The other thing is that, people could come to the meeting in the beginning or relapse and come to the meetings under the influence of intoxicants, and that would not be acceptable to come to the mosque while under the active influence, acutely intoxicated. So that's interesting. That's a good argument there. I really don't have the time to go into it here, but it's just fascinating to look at the history about how the Prophet Muhammad brought about the change in attitudes of people towards intoxicants. And in one part of that long history, he was using the mosques to give lectures about the effect on health of intoxicants. So The Prophet himself used mosques to try to change attitudes of the use of intoxicants. But there are some problems there if we think about meetings being held at mosques. So here now we get to my research question, okay? Which is, how do Muslims in Muslim countries negotiate these cultural barriers? So it was a mixed methods approach. Over a 3-week period, I used naturalistic observation, and I attended AA and NA meetings in Istanbul, Turkey, and in Islamic Republic of Iran, and Isfahan and Tehran. During these meetings, I used naturalistic observation, and then I also interviewed 20 individuals asking how they negotiated these cultural barriers, and 10 people from Turkey, 6 from Isfahan, and 4 from Tehran. One thing that stands out right away is that these two different Islamic cultures seem to have a mixed utility of the 12-step model. So let's compare the 2 largest cities in each country. We've got Tehran has about approximately 9 million, Istanbul about 15 million, okay? When we look at, I want to emphasize non-English speaking meetings, because in almost any large city, there's an expat community of Europeans and Americans that have English-speaking 12-step meetings, and I'm not interested in that, okay? I'm interested in Muslims in their Muslim context. So non-English-speaking AA meetings in Istanbul, population 15 million, give or take a few. Number of weekly AA meetings, 10. Number of weekly NA meetings, 7. In Tehran, population 9 million, give or take a few. Number of weekly AA meetings, 20. Number of weekly NA meetings, 300. So already we notice right here that there's something going on here, that Iran has embraced this model and is successfully using it. And Turkey, it doesn't seem to be doing so well. I went to one meeting on Wednesday night in Isfahan, 300 to 400 Muslim men. It was a joyous celebration of recovery. People dancing, singing, bringing flowers like they do in Iran. And they were celebrating people's periods of sobriety. And I asked them, are there usually this many people at this meeting? And a fellow told me, oh, no. Usually it's much larger, but there's an important soccer game on, and everybody's at home. A lot of people are at home watching that game. So it's interesting to notice that difference, right? We see a differential outcome, that one culture seems embracing it and one is not doing so well. We'll explore that a little bit, why, a little bit later on. Another potential cultural barrier is this mixed gender composition. So what about discussing intimate material in front of members of the opposite sex? Now we really see divergent things going on. In Turkey, no problem. Men and women talking about personal intimate material in front of each other, no issue. In Iran, it's usually gender-specific meetings for men, meetings for women. If it was mixed, they would refrain from discussing intimate material. So one individual went to Overeaters Anonymous meetings in Tehran, and that individual said that we still really see a Western model of behavior in Overeaters. Maybe it's a self-selection. The idea of Overeaters Anonymous is a rather Western concept, I think. So there, in Tehran, they openly discussed intimate material in front of other people. How about with the mixed genders, about the physical contact with someone you're not married to, holding hands? Turkey, no problem. People, men and women, they're not married, hugging each other, greeting each other during the meeting, holding hands during the meeting, hugging each other after the meeting. Looked just like a typical Western 12-step meeting. In Iran, usually a gender-specific meeting. If it wasn't a gender-specific meeting, they would have a circle of men over here and a circle of women over here. And in one meeting, they had a giant circle with women on one side and men on the other. And I said, well, how are you doing that? And it turns out there was a husband and wife joining the two halves of the circle. So there was no problem negotiating that the idea of physical contact between a member of the opposite sex that you're not married to. They figured that out in an eloquent way, no problem. How about prescription against the public disclosure of sin? In Turkey, not a problem. They openly discuss things. In Iran, this was not seen as a problem unless members of the opposite gender were present, and then they refrained from details once again. How about the reciting of Christian prayers? Remember, this was really the thing that could be a problem. This could be a real issue. And what we found at every single meeting I went to, they closed with the prayer. They did not use the Our Father. They used the Serenity Prayer. And the Serenity Prayer, like I said, has no concept of shirk in it, and there's really, they did not see it as an issue whatsoever. Now we go to some of the qualitative interviews, talking about what's the nature of the fifth step, how important is it, and what's the function of it. Every single person, 20 people interviewed, they all unanimously said it's a very, very important, the aspect of sharing with another human being. It has nothing to do with confession or forgiveness. That is all about seeking self-understanding, gaining self-knowledge through sharing it with another person with the same problem. So that was very interesting, I think. How about the appropriateness of hosting the meetings at a mosque? In Turkey, none of the meetings were at a mosque. In Iran, none of the AA meetings were at a mosque, but this was because they were going to do this at first, and they asked permission, and the government said, yes, you can do this, but give us a list of everyone there, and we'll tell you if you can have the meeting or not. And the people in AA said, no, that goes against the tradition of anonymity. We can't tell you who's at the meeting. So we're not going to allow you to have the meetings there. It also caused some suspicion about why are they meeting there. And the joke is, this is not true, but the joke is, if you're looking for the AA meeting in, especially in Tehran, you just look for the strange fellow taking pictures of people entering a door, like the idea that the government's suspicious of what goes on there. So none of the AA meetings were held in a mosque. About 10% were held in, the NA meetings were held in a mosque in Iran. So what's the conclusion? Remember, we always have to be careful about what's really 12-step doctrine or literature and what's the culture, okay? So nowhere in the literature does say you're supposed to hold hands and say that, our Father. Even within AA, within Western AA, even from right at the beginning, from like 1940 on, there were two traditions, an Akron tradition and a Cleveland tradition, where in the Cleveland tradition, they would say, hi, Paul, and they would hug each other and they would have a lot of physical contact. In the Akron tradition, they wouldn't say, hi, Paul, and they wouldn't hold hands while saying the prayer. So, and both of those were valid expressions of the 12-step model, okay? We have to be careful not thinking that some of these things are intricate parts of the model when they're not, okay? When we look at the difference between the prevalence in Turkey and Iran, I think that now some of this is changing, but speaking in broad generalizations, I think a lot of people would agree with me that Turkey is a secularized Western, maybe one of the most Westernized of the Muslim countries, and that there's changes going on. It's changing now, and it's becoming more religious, but I would say in general, speaking at a gross level, that Turkey in general is a lower level of religiosity. Iran is a much higher level of religiosity. So maybe the issue, I was asking the wrong question. Maybe I should have asked the question of not does it work in Muslim countries, but does it work in countries with high or low levels of Islamic religiosity, okay? Some limitations to this study, okay, first of all, okay, I love Turkey. I love Istanbul. I've spent more time in Istanbul than any other city outside of the United States. I love Turkey. I love Istanbul. All right. I love the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Iranian people are my favorite people in the whole world. I love them. Okay. You'll never find a gentler, kinder culture. All right. But from stepping back here, you could argue that I picked two least representative of the Muslim global cult Ummah. Okay. That Turkey is Western and secularized. Iran is Shia, which is only about 15 to 20%. So a really good criticism would be that I picked non-representative Muslim countries to look at this, okay? I will notice that when I was doing this in Saudi Arabia, that there were no non-English speaking meetings in Saudi Arabia when I was looking at this. Future research, there is an Islamic version of the 12-step model called Miladi Islami. It's beyond the scope of this, but there are some problems with it, I think, from my perspective as someone who studied the 12-step model and addictive recovery from addictive disorders. I won't go into that, but there's some problems. They remove at the fifth step, the critical component of admitting to another human being they've removed, that is just admitted to yourself and to Allah. But it would be interesting to see if that has better outcomes with Muslims than traditional 12-step model. We really need to look at degree of religiosity, either at the individual level or at the cultural level. This is really problematic, okay? Esma Shana Masri and I published a scale, Religiosity of Islam scale, we found problems trying to compare cultures, cross-culturally compare relative degrees of religiosity. It's difficult to do, but I do think you have to take into consideration that we can't just globally look at Muslims or Muslim countries without looking at degree of religiosity. I think it's a strong moderator variable that we need to pay attention to. I want to sincerely thank Dr. Raman Radfar, he's in charge of addictions treatment and prevention in Esfahan and all of South Iran. He's a wonderful, brilliant guy. And also in the middle of this, his wife, who was pregnant, had one of his children right when we were in the middle of this process. And he was very gracious, and I'm very grateful for him for his support and his time. While I have your attention, I'm also going to use a self-serving question that right now I'm doing a study, and I'm desperately trying to find clinicians that provide counseling or psychotherapy services to Muslims. I'm interested in Muslims who are suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder. Ideally, I'm looking for Muslim refugees living in a non-Muslim country who are suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder, especially with religious features. If you know anyone who's a clinician dealing with such a population, I would really, really appreciate it if you could give me that information so I could do a brief interview with them. I'm trying to really understand that dynamic of how to treat that population. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I'm really feel honored to be part of this. And once again, I want to thank the organizations that put this wonderful conference on. And I will talk to you later, all, hopefully.